Welcome. All right, so how do you solve a quadratic by completing a square? Now, one of my videos, I go through how we actually use a quadratic to get the quadratic formula by completing the square, but I'm actually going to go through a problem, and I'm going to go through it, very basically, or in a very basic fashion, and kind of work you through exactly, what is the process. And I'll give you kind of some steps as well that I'll write onto the side. So when solving a quadratic by completing the square, we can do this for all quadratics instead of factoring, which is pretty nice. However, we like to teach factoring first because factoring, once you get a lot of practice in it, for a lot of them that can be factored, is much quicker than completing the square. However, we can do completing the square for all quadratics that we want to solve for. The first main important thing is we need to have it set equal to 0. So that'd be my first step that I'll tell you is set equal to 0. So in this case, you can just erase the y and set it equal to 0. Well, actually, let me give you guys a problem. Let's do y equals x squared plus 6x minus 5. Okay? So the first thing that I would say is, set equal to 0. So I can go ahead and erase this, right? The next step that I would say is set your a equal to 1. All right, and to do this, now here I have an equation that a is already equal to 1. But what if my equation looked like this? Well, what I would do then is factor out a 3 out of my first two terms. So therefore, I now have my quadratic term is set equal to 1. All right, and you could solve something like this as well. It's not going to be the same thing. But just make sure you're set equal to 1, because then we're going to go through on this. So you set it equal to 1. Then the next thing is we need to determine our perfect square. And to do that, what we do is we take our linear term, divide it by 2, and square it. So in this case, what I do is I have x squared plus 6x minus 5. All right? So we're going to focus on our quadratic and our linear term. And we want to determine a perfect square within that. We're kind of forgetting about the negative 5. Some people like to add the negative 5 to the other side. That's perfectly fine. I do it different ways in here. But what I want to do is set this equal to 0. So I need to take b divided by 2 and set it equal to 0, or square it. So I take 6 divided by 2 and square it. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. Then what I do is I add b divided by 2 squared to both sides. All right, so we're going to add it within our binomial. And we're going to add it over here. Why am I adding on both sides? Because remember, whenever on equations, if you're solving equations, whatever you do on one side, you have to be able to do on the other side. I also, sometimes students like to subtract it. If you add it on one side, you can subtract it on the same side. It doesn't really matter which way. For this video, I'm just deciding to do it this way. So you add it both on both sides. Then you factor to a binomial squared. Now, what's nice about creating a perfect square is now you can factor to a binomial squared. So now I have 9 equals x plus 3 squared minus 5. Then the last step I use is use your square root property, or square root method. So what the square root method is telling us to do is to isolate our variable x. So all I need to do is use my inverse operations. So I need to get everything away from the x. So I'll add the 5 to both sides. So I have 14 equals x plus 3 squared. Then I undo the square root. Okay? So now I have a plus or minus the square root of 14. Again, like I said, I kind of made up this problem here. Equals x plus 3. Then I'll subtract the 3. So therefore, I now have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 14 equals x. So that's kind of your broken down system to completing the square. And I hope that will help you out through the rest of these videos. Thanks.